Hello, I'm Fraser Myers, Deputy Editor of Spiked, and I'm thrilled to be joined by journalist, analyst, and Middle East expert Emily Schrader. Emily, welcome.
Hi, great to be here.
Emily, we're talking in a week where the US and Iran are set to unveil a memorandum of understanding. Not quite the peace deal that it's being made out to be, possibly a glorified ceasefire. It's not entirely clear what this deal means, but the signs so far, I think it's fair to say, are not good. It seems like a betrayal of the Iranian people, a betrayal of Israel, and it doesn't seem to meet any of the goals that had been set out at the very beginning of this war. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Unfortunately, yes, I think that's a very accurate assessment. This is what we know so far, which admittedly isn't enough, which is part of the problem, and I'll explain. But from what we know so far, this is truly disastrous. It's absolutely a betrayal of the Iranian people, first and foremost. It's also a betrayal of the Israeli people and a betrayal of other allies of the United States in the Gulf region. The amount of missiles and drones that the UAE, for example, received during this conflict and didn't respond to hardly anything. I mean, it's more than Israel faced. So this is really, truly an ideological and political betrayal of the entire region. And I don't know what all factors go into President Trump's decision making, but it's very clear that how he presented this in the lead up is very, very different, almost 180 degrees different than what he's doing and saying now. And a lot of his comments related to these negotiations and the memorandum of understanding are completely inappropriate and actually adding more damage to however bad this deal may be when we actually get the text. The way that he has allowed the Islamic Republic of Iran to dictate and demand that other sovereign countries are included and incorporated in this memorandum of understanding. It's craziness. I don't know why anybody, either the Islamic Republic or the United States, would think that it's acceptable that Lebanon, which is a sovereign country of its own, and Israel, which is a sovereign country of its own, that you can have negotiations about those two parties being in conflict with each other. And I should clarify that it's not actually a conflict with Lebanon. It's a conflict with Hezbollah that's occupying Lebanon, a proxy of the Islamic regime. But the audacity of them to dictate to those two countries what should be done about a conflict that they're not in. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, and it's very disappointing to see that the leader of the free world is condoning this and allowing that to be a factor that plays into it. And we see exactly what the results are in the lead up to this memorandum of understanding, because the night before it was announced, Hezbollah attacked Israel again on that northern border, and Israel responded in Beirut by targeting someone who's responsible for the deaths of at least 5 U.S. military. And instead of the United States, I don't know, at best, looking the other way, then we see Trump's comments against Israel as if Israel caused the problem for responding. I can understand frustration if Israel had initiated a major military action right at that time and it wasn't provoked. It wasn't an act of self defense. That wasn't what happened. And so we see a real rewriting of the narrative and of the history. And unfortunately, that's what the administration has been doing since this 60-day memorandum of understanding, which really is a pause in fighting, nothing more than that. It doesn't even address the nuclear issue yet. That's what they're trying to present it as some kind of peace deal, which is absurd. This morning, 2 Iranians were executed, protesters who were arrested during the January protests. And you see President Trump just a few hours prior to that saying, the new regime isn't as bad as the current regime. They're literally the same people.
Yeah.
The head of the judiciary is the same person. They're all murderers. They all have blood on their hands. So, this sort of gaslighting to spin for a deal that, for whatever reason, you politically want to make, I mean, take ownership for it. At least take ownership for it. But don't insult the intelligence of the entire world, particularly U.S. allies in the Middle East, by saying, oh, well, this is a great deal, but we're not going to show you it. We're just going to allow the Islamic Republic to dictate what the narrative is about these terms. And then we saw the vice president yesterday trying to defend that move by saying, well, there's sensitivities in the Arab and Muslim world, and that's why we don't want to release the text. So you're prioritizing the sensitivities of the Arab and Muslim world over the American people? It's crazy. It's crazy.
I want to talk through some of the specifics or some of the specific themes because we don't know the exact text of the deal, but we do have a sense of its direction. So, you talked earlier about the situation with Israel and Hezbollah. At the start of the war, it was considered one of the aims, one of the potentially good outcomes that Hezbollah and other Iranian proxies might be constrained, that Iran might have to cut ties with them. Yet it seems what we've ended up with is Israel being constrained by the terms of this peace deal, this ceasefire, the memorandum of understanding, but Hezbollah seemingly free to carry on. Have I got that right?
It does seem to be that way, and the thing that really mystifies me about all of this is I understand political decision making. What I don't understand is this almost PR campaign to sanitize the clearly illegal actions of Hezbollah. I mean, Israel didn't start any conflict with Lebanon or with Hezbollah. It was Hezbollah that got involved. It was them who started attacking after October 7th. After that, when there was a ceasefire, it was Hezbollah that continued attacking the northern border. And mind you, all of this, Hezbollah shouldn't even be in southern Lebanon, according to international law. UN Resolution 1701 and 1559 not only called for Hezbollah to be only north of the Litani River, but furthermore called for them to be completely disarmed. That's a UN Security Council resolution. It has never been enforced, despite the fact that the United States alone, for example, as well as many other countries that contributed to UNIFIL, but the United States alone contributed well over $1 billion into UNIFIL, which is supposed to be the peacekeeping forces in southern Lebanon. And what did they do? Absolutely nothing. They allowed Hezbollah to rebuild, to restock their missiles on the northern border of Israel for years. And Israel waited and waited and waited because they didn't want to deal with what they're dealing with now. Every time we defend ourselves, we're the ones who get criticized for it. How does that make sense? Never mind the fact that the Islamic Republic is funding and arming and training a terror proxy in Lebanon on foreign soil, and all you hear about is Israeli occupation? Are you serious? I mean, no matter what you think about Israel and the conflict, the double standards are very, very apparent when you look at the reality on the ground in the region. And that's something that over time has only harmed other people in the Middle East, even more so. The longer we go, the worse it gets. The Druze, the Alawites in Syria, the Kurds, the Berbers, all of these groups across the Middle East, Yazidis, as we know, that suffered under ISIS, the Christians in the Middle East, all of these groups face increasing persecution when we look the other way. It only starts with the Jews, but it gets much, much worse from there. And the biggest murderer of Arab Muslims, actually, in the Middle East is the Islamic Republic, whether directly or via proxy groups across the region. Yemen, the Houthis. Iraq, you have multiple terror proxy groups. Syria, you've had the IRGC building bases, especially under Assad. It's somewhat been curbed now. You have Hezbollah in Lebanon that's completely hijacked that country for decades, to the point where Lebanese are begging for assistance. You have all these terror proxies, including, of course, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the Palestinian territories. And all of this is being orchestrated by the Islamic Republic. It's terrible.
And in terms of the regime, it was again going back to the start of the war. It was hoped that either the regime could be changed externally, or perhaps that protesters might rise up, might be able to, with the cover of US-Israeli air power, be able to overthrow the regime. Now, other than the targeted assassinations of certain people, as you said, we do still have the same regime. So, are the Iranian people any better off? People living under this oppression, are they any better off as a result of this conflict?
The Iranian people are worse off as a result of this conflict. There are, of course, silver linings, such as the assassination of Khamenei and some of the other particularly nefarious leaders of the Islamic Republic, but it wasn't enough. And the fact that we've seen under the leadership of President Trump this sort of laundering of the regime as if it's something new is extremely dangerous, and it comes at the direct expense of, first and foremost, the people of Iran. After that, all of the people of the region. Any kind of sanctions relief, any kind of frozen assets that are unfrozen and released to that regime will be spent on terrorism. It will be invested in planning or carrying out another October 7th style event. Without question, we know that that's the case. That's why so many Iranians are very, very upset at the prospect of any deal whatsoever. But I do want to emphasize that I think there's a lot of rhetoric right now, claiming that Israel persuaded Trump to go to war under the guise that the Iranian people will rise up and the regime will fall, and that it will be, chick chack, as we say in Hebrew, very quick and easy. It was never going to be very quick and easy. And I want to clarify for the record and remind people that both Israel and the United States explicitly stated that regime change was not a goal of this operation. It was focused on ensuring that the Islamic Republic never has a nuclear weapon. If regime change is a byproduct, then great. That's what everyone across the board said. It's even what the Crown Prince, the most popular opposition leader, Reza Pahlavi, that's what he said as well. Throughout the war, we also saw Mossad, Netanyahu himself, Trump, and CENTCOM commander Brad Cooper. All of them were saying, do not take to the streets, to the Iranian people. Do not go into the streets. And on top of that, at the time when the ceasefire was declared, Israel had just begun, for a day or two, begun striking besiege and IRGC checkpoints, which is one of the main inhibitors to large-scale demonstrations formulating, because they're literally shooting people in the streets when that happens in the major cities. So we saw that, Israel was starting to carry out some of those targeted operations that would enable the people to protest, despite the fact that that wasn't an objective, a stated objective militarily for the United States or for Israel. It's only now after the fact that people are saying, oh, well, see, Israel tried to convince them it would be easy and it didn't happen. It's not true. From day one, the entire operation was Trump's vision, not Israel's. In fact, Israel wanted to assassinate several other senior figures in the Islamic Republic, and it was the United States that stopped them in those initial blows that took out Khamenei and some of the other leadership. Why? Because Trump disagreed with Israel and wanted to identify a leader from within the system, the same way he did with Venezuela, with Delcy Rodriguez, despite the fact that many intelligence experts and Iran experts warned the United States that this is not a viable alternative to the regime because of the ideology of the regime and how it actually works. It's not just about one figure in the style of Maduro, it's much broader than that. So there isn't really a way that you can say, well, it's Israel's fault or responsibility, and yet you see a lot of that narrative going around, and it's a very lazy and easy cop out. There was also the issue of the potential invasion of Kurds, Ahvazis, and several other groups that the United States had claimed that they armed. We don't have independent confirmation on that. This actually wasn't Israel's plan. Again, this was the United States that wanted to go through with this plan. But as the country that is acting as a model ally to the U.S., Israel was like, okay, we'll go with what your what your mission plans are on this front, as long as it ensures our security. I don't think that was a good idea to begin with. However, the reason it didn't happen is because of Trump. Again, it was Trump who chickened out and didn't want to do that operation because of the pressure from Erdogan. So, which is a whole other issue. Turkey is a whole other set of issues. But there's no way you can say that this was Israel's mission plan or that Israel was leading the charge, because, quite frankly, I know it sounds very arrogant to say, but if it was, we would see better results. Israel understands the Middle East. It's the only way we can survive in the region. And I think that countries like the United States, while they are a superpower and Israel isn't, would do well to listen to allies in the region about how to cope with these enemies. Appeasement doesn't work. It never has, and it never will.
Let's talk about the nuclear aspect to this. Even the memorandum of understanding, when it's signed on Friday, is not going to have in itself a nuclear deal. There'll be some more negotiations, but again, a lot of the commentary is suggesting that it could be worse than the deal that Obama struck. And to remind people, this is the deal that President Trump himself described as the worst deal in the history of deals. Do you think it could be that bad?
Admittedly, as we stated before, we don't have the text of this deal intentionally, which is a whole other issue. So I don't know for certain, but from everything that's been reported, the fact that the White House is being so evasive about it, the fact that they haven't shown allies like Israel about it, yet they expect Israel to cease fighting in Lebanon against Hezbollah, It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous, and it causes even more concern about what this deal actually entails. At this point, I don't trust the administration whatsoever when it comes to what will be released to the regime and when. I think that there are so many workarounds that the regime has for getting finances to them that the the White House could very easily never come forward. It could be going through Qatar. It could be going potentially through UAE, although I don't think that's the case given everything that happened. There's all kinds of ways for, if they wanted to, for the United States to ensure that millions, if not billions of dollars go back into the hands of the mullahs, which is disastrous for everyone in the region. And I absolutely 110% think that if that is what happens, that it is worse than the JCPOA. And the fact that we've made all these concessions simply to talk more, that there isn't actually any kind of resolution to the nuclear issue in this memorandum of understanding is obscene. What are you giving the money for when you're not even coming to any kind of agreement about the nuclear material? They said in theory that we would not pursue a nuclear weapon. They've been saying that for decades. So the idea that this is something new is absurd. It's complete spin. It's the White House, it's Trump trying to save his reputation, I guess, although it seems to be crashing and burning at an epic speed. But it's very alarming, very, very alarming. And it's a myth that, from the beginning, Trump said, we will only accept unconditional surrender, and they don't have any right to enrich uranium, which I agree with. And we saw a little bit of inconsistency on that from the special envoy Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff in interviews was saying, well, we'll allow them only low enriched uranium, 3.67%. 3.67 is the limit set by the JCPOA. The problem is that they're enriching uranium at all. You don't need a rogue regime that's murdering 40,000 people in the streets, that has pledged to wipe other countries off the map entirely, that has death to America, death to England, and death to Israel as part of their daily routine for children at school. Why do those people need to enrich uranium? We know it's not for peaceful purposes. They've even said it. Officials have said it. IRGC officials and regime officials have said this repeatedly on their own state media in their own circles. Why do you think it's different? You believe what they're telling you in a negotiation instead? It's preposterous. But this idea that they could enrich even low enriched uranium is very dangerous. I mean, the uranium that they've been hiding that's enriched at 60%, that's 90% of the way to a nuclear weapon. I don't know if people realize that. Even if you dilute the materials, it still is material that it's more difficult, but you could theoretically re-enrich that material. You could pursue nuclear weapons through the infrastructure that they already have set up there. And there's hardly any, at least public, discussion of this. And I believe that the American people and people of the world who have been threatened and impacted and harmed by the Islamic Republic are owed an explanation and an answer to those terms. We need to see transparency from the regime and also from the White House, and we're not getting that. What we're now getting is we had a lack of transparency from the Islamic Republic, and now we also have a lack of transparency from the United States, which is a very, very sad situation to see.
And I want to talk about another weapon that Iran now has in its arsenal, which is the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz. Um, it wasn't known before this conflict that this would be either something that the Iranians were interested in pursuing or effective necessarily, but it has become clear that Iran, the Islamic Republic, have the power to hold the global economy by the chokehold, essentially. Um, what does that mean going forward? This again, it feels as if we're in a worse place than we were when we started.
I think we are in a worse place than when we started. I think it was a strategic mistake on the part of the United States to not deal with the Strait of Hormuz first, especially because actually far more than Israel, it impacts them, more. Not as much as Europe, of course, but it does impact them more than Israel, that particular issue. And that should have been something that was foreseen by the United States, especially given the fact that it was their mission plan. It was their orchestration of how they wanted to conduct the war. So I think that was short sighted on their part. But again, it speaks to the fact, and this is something I've spoken about in the past, that The United States, whether a Democratic or a Republican administration, consistently does not understand the mentality and the ideology of the Islamic Republic of Iran. They consistently underestimate them. The Islamic Republic runs circles around the United States in negotiations, and we see it from right to left. It doesn't matter who's negotiating. They're much, much better at it. As President Trump said, they always are winning at negotiations. So we unfortunately see that pattern continuing. The United States was very short-sighted on the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, and the reason for that is because they didn't think that the Islamic Republic was willing to sacrifice their own economy pretty much in full by closing the Strait of Hormuz, um, by doing that, because it harms them even more than it harms the global economy. But they're fine with that because they don't care about their own people. They don't care about anything going on in the country. The economy has been in free fall for months and months and months. Tehran doesn't have water. They don't have electricity. This is a wealthy, resource-rich country. It's ridiculous that this is the state for the people of Iran. But they don't care about that. They don't care about that, and they will do everything before they surrender. Everything. That's how it works in the Middle East. It's not particularly surprising. They're extremists. In their ideology, they're extremists. And they're highly sophisticated extremists. A lot of times in the United States, in particular, when you talk about extremism, particularly terrorism, they're thinking of the Taliban and people who are, running around in the desert with machine guns and making homemade explosives and trying to carry out terror attacks here and there or at embassies or in different places. That is obviously an aspect of it, but that's not the situation with the Islamic Republic. The war, and yes, war, that they are waging globally against the West is much more sophisticated. In fact, a lot of times people in the West don't even notice. One of the biggest fronts of this war isn't the military one, it's the information warfare, which is why it's so dangerous that the White House has given them the upper hand willingly by giving them the opportunity to define the narrative. Everything that the state media of the Islamic regime has put out about this memorandum of understanding is what's fueling this concern about it, and apparently for good reason. The White House has the power to respond to this and say, no, that's not true, or no, we won't do this. Again, why are the sensitivities of the Arab and Muslim world? And by the way, it's funny that he used the word Arab because Iran isn't an Arab country. So again, Iranian people are left out of this equation completely. But they're more concerned about that than they are about what the American people think. Completely misguided priorities, a complete misreading of the situation.
And I do want to talk a bit about how this affects people outside the Middle East, both in terms of Iran's sort of you know direct threats and the media aspect to it. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because a lot of people will, in their heads, they think, well, that's over there in the Middle East. It might affect me in terms of the price of petrol, but actually, it's not a existential danger to me in the way that it is to the people over there. Can you speak a bit to how it does actually impact us in the Western democracies who feel so distant from this?
Sure. So, first, on the practical front, the physical front, we have seen dozens of terror attacks plotted by the IRGC here in the UK. And many of them have been foiled. A lot of that is thanks to Israeli intelligence that has been shared with the relevant agencies. We've also seen plots being thwarted in Canada, in Australia, and the United States. Unfortunately, we've also seen plots carried out, a lot of them smaller scale plots. We've seen several attacks on Jewish communities, in particular in Europe. We have confirmed, just as of a few days ago, because the FBI actually caught one of the leaders of this group, that it is acting at the direction of the Islamic Republic of Iran. One of the tactics that they have been very smart about carrying out the regime is that they're working with mafia groups, a lot of times Eastern European mafia groups or criminal syndicates. In South America, they're working with some of the cartels to carry out whatever operations, from money laundering to practical attacks to assassination attempts or assassinations that are carried out against dissidents and other figures abroad. They've targeted journalists. I myself have been targeted in many things, both cyber attacks, but also at one point I was invited to a conference that didn't exist in Europe and things like this. We don't know if that was for intended assassination or intended kidnapping, but it's absolutely true that they have used Europe, particularly the UK, as kind of a playground for their activities, the IRGC itself. as well as working with other organizations and cells here on the ground to carry out their agenda. And that is by design. I mean, the revolution in 1979, their goal was to export this revolution. It's a crazy, fantastical, extreme ideology that they're trying to promote around the world. This ideology of Khomenism. It isn't something where they just kind of keep to themselves and they want to be left alone in their extremism. No, their goal is to export it. And that's exactly what we see happening. They've been more effective in the Middle East, and the next chapter is the West. And what they have started with is undermining and subverting the morale, the public morale in these countries. And it's part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason that we see such a stark polarization politically, why we see so much incitement and disinformation about what's happening, why the story of what's actually happening in reality in conflicts such as Israel and Gaza is so dramatically distorted in how it's reported, what people think about it, how people talk about it. The rhetoric of extremism, of hatred against Jews, but not only Jews, just starts with them, has been normalized. And a lot of that normalization is a result of artificial amplification of specific and intentional narratives that are being spearheaded by the Islamic Republic, as well as some of their other allies in the information warfare front, from Qatar to Turkey to China in some cases on some issues, and of course, Russia.
Do you think there's any good news that can be taken for the direction of the Middle East? I'm thinking just in terms of the fact that a lot of other Middle Eastern countries, not just Israel, maybe are starting to wake up to the threat that Iran poses to them, and not just to Israel.
Definitely, there is a growing sense throughout the Middle East that Iran, or the Islamic Republic, I should clarify, the Islamic Republic itself is very much a threat to them directly. This is something they've known about. Of course, there's the Sunni Shia rivalry, but it's much broader than that now. We see more so than ever a lot of the minorities of the Middle East speaking up. We see, as I mentioned before, Druze and Alawite and Kurdish groups, Christian groups, Copts in Egypt. A lot of these groups are speaking out against this sort of, for lack of a better term, colonialist activity of the Islamic Republic, setting up all of these proxy terror groups to destabilize regions of the Middle East, carry out mass bloodshed against the people of this region. And of course, the targeting of even civilian locations in the UAE, in Bahrain, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, countries that didn't ever attack the Islamic Republic, that don't have anything to do with the conflict, and yet they were dragged in intentionally. That activity by the regime is a direct assault on the normalization between Israel and those countries. They are actively trying to thwart peace. When you look at how Hezbollah reacted even to the memorandum of understanding, you see why they did it. The Islamic Republic wanted to provoke Israel, not because they necessarily wanted to sabotage a memorandum of understanding, but because they wanted to get more concessions. They knew that Israel would respond because Israel has to for its own self-defense. And their response to that was to say to Trump, oh, well, we want more concessions because Israel responded, despite the fact that it was Hezbollah who attacked Israel first.
Mm.
So it's a whole game being played out here, and one that's very, very dangerous. And I think that in the region, there's more of an understanding than ever that this is how it's going. But the divide between what the mainstream understanding is in the West and what the mainstream understanding is in the Middle East is growing greater, but literally by the hour. And it's a crazy thing to see because the Middle East used to be a region that's so plagued by extremism. And it seems that a lot of that extremism has been exported to the West. And now the Middle East is saying, what? Wait a second. What are you doing? These people aren't good people. The people that are advocating for what they're advocating for in the Middle East from the West are not our allies. That's not what we want. We don't want this terrorism and this extremism plaguing our regions. And that's the same position that you saw from the UAE and from Bahrain, Morocco. Many of these more moderate Muslim countries are not on board with this extremism. And whether or not we can build a Middle Eastern coalition together with Israel to fight back against this fanaticism so that countries like Lebanon can live in peace. And I didn't say before, but I should emphasize that there is no territorial dispute between between Lebanon and the state of Israel.
Yeah.
There is no land that Israel wants. There's no settlements that are being set up in Lebanon. I've heard a lot of people saying things like this. They confuse it, I think, with the situation in Gaza or the conflict over Judea and Samaria, and that's simply not the case. Israel doesn't want anything to do with Lebanon. We don't want to be in Lebanon at all. We want to get out of Lebanon, but we need to make sure that Hezbollah is disarmed so it doesn't continue to threaten the residents in northern Israel.
Emily Schrader, thank you very much.
Thank you.